Hi, everyone. My name is Pratik Thaker. I am a product manager at Google. And today I'm going to talk to you about what product management is and how to break into it. Before we start, though, let me mention that all the views I express here don't reflect those of my employer or any other organization or group of individuals. These insights come from my experience and they're personal to me. So let's get started. I'll start by introducing myself before going on to a discussion of what product management really is. We'll discuss a few of the key skills that a good product manager needs. I'll then share some tips on how you can break into the industry and a few pointers of what to do after you get that first job. So let's get started. Who am I? Well, before I got into product management, I did a whole bunch of things. I started off studying aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech, where I also got a degree in artificial intelligence and robotics. And then I got a master's in engineering management from Cornell. My first job was a financial software developer at Bloomberg. And I did that for about 3 years before the aerospace bug bit again. And I moved to India to join a private startup participating in the Google Lunar X Prize. So this was a private competition that would award like $20 million to the first team that could privately land a rover on the moon. Now, we weren't able to pull that off, but the 2 years I spent there were absolutely phenomenal. And then I had the entrepreneurial bug bite me, and I moved to Dubai to start an architectural consultancy company. Now, after that, and after doing that for about 3 years, I made the move to product, and I started as a product manager at Careem. So this was a Middle Eastern ride-hailing startup, and I joined as a PM on the driver side app. Uh, in about 3 years, the company got acquired by Uber, and I then moved on to my current role, which is the product manager at Google, where I'm a PM on the search team. Now, as you can see, I came from a very, very non-product background and was somehow able to build, so far a successful product career. The question is, how is something like this even possible? To understand that, we first need to ask ourselves, what is product management? So, what is product management? If you were to search the internet, you would find a definition that looks something like this, right? So, product management is, a leadership position that leads a cross-functional team. PMs deal with strategy and roadmap and define features. They make strategic product decisions and they analyze the market and the competition. They're in charge of the product vision and they deliver value based on what the customers need. They work with engineering, marketing, sales, support, and they define the why, what, and the when. Now, this is a fairly good definition, right? And it's accurate, but it still kind of misses out, I think, on what the essence of product management is, right? Like, what does it feel like to be a product manager? So let's go to another very popular quote. The product manager is the CEO of the product. Now, this is a little controversial, but I like it in one sense because just like the CEO, the product manager is ultimately responsible for the success or the failure of their product. But the key difference, and this is highlighted all over the place, is that the product manager, unlike the very smug looking gentleman in this picture, doesn't really have any power. They don't have people reporting to them. They almost never have dedicated resources or budget. And oftentimes, they're dealing with pressures from leadership, right? So they don't really have the power to do exactly what they want to do. So where does that leave us? Well, let's take this definition and modify it a little bit. I'd say the product manager is the CEO of a product, but more like the CEO of a young, struggling startup. And just like the CEO, who's facing headwinds every single day, whether it is getting the resources to get their things done or dealing with high-powered stakeholders, this young CEO, just like a product manager, needs hustle, and they need to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do in order to make their product successful. Because ultimately, they're still responsible, right? But just without that kind of clout. How does this play out in practice? Well, Let's look at a few fairly famous early stage startup CEOs. So, like Steve Jobs in this picture, a product manager sometimes just needs to get their hands dirty, whether it is technical work, doing analysis, writing scripts, just even taking meeting notes. You need to get down and dirty to empower your teams. Sometimes, like the Airbnb founders who started to sell cereal to fund their Airbnb project, the PM needs to find creative ways in order to get resources for what they want to do. So this could be, striking up deals or negotiating or reducing the scope of something, right? Things you wouldn't normally imagine. Sometimes, like Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, the product manager needs to just make coffee for his team, or do other things that keeps the team happy and motivated. And sometimes, like a very young Bill Gates here, the PM just needs to step aside and let the people who know what they're doing do what they know best, right? What this means is that the product manager does anything and everything and does so as a true generalist to ensure the success of the product. And just like this famous painting of Marilyn Monroe, the product manager expresses herself in many different shades in her work. In fact, the role of a product manager is just as diverse. It's not only different from company to company, but even within the same company, different teams have different needs from their product managers. And even the same product at a different stage in its life cycle behaves differently. So, and a product manager working on something that's just getting started might need to do a lot more user research. Whereas somebody in the end stages is likely spending a lot of time debugging and QAing. So, what this means is the product manager role or definition is not one thing, it's not a degree, right? In fact, you will not find any institution, at least not in my knowledge, that provides a 4-year bachelor's in product management. That kind of thing doesn't exist. It's too diverse. Rather, product management is a set of skills. And anyone who possesses those skills or works on making those skills better in themselves has a decent shot at being a product manager. That's exactly what makes stories like mine possible, where somebody from aerospace and construction can end up in digital product management. So the question is, what are these skills? Well, there are many, many ideas around this, but my personal view is there are a set of hard skills and a set of soft skills. Hard skills are more business engineering, etc., and soft skills have more to do with people and communication. Let's take some time to go through each one of these in depth. So the first hard skill is business and management. Essentially, the product manager role is a business role. And so knowledge of business is key. You need to be able to understand and define strategy. It's key to be able to understand competition. A lot of times, PMs are not directly responsible for profit and loss. But if you were to propose a product that negatively impacted the bottom line or did not make economic sense, it's not going to fly. And increasingly, in a lot of younger startups that are operations heavy, that part of the business is also very important. For example, ride hailing or grocery delivery are heavily operational fields. So having that knowledge is key in order to drive impact. Similarly, project management is very important as well. As a product manager, you will often have to communicate timelines to leadership. You will be dealing with uh, limited resources, and you'll have to figure out how to fit all the work that you need to do into that. You need to be ruthless at prioritizing. You'll never have enough ability to do it all. And a lot of product managers are also very, very good at process. So setting up the right processes to help the team succeed, whether internally or externally, often falls on the product manager. Now, on the right are some fields where these skills are commonly found. So consultants generally have, good grasp of these concepts. Project and program managers also make great entry points into product. In fact, a lot of digital companies do have a TPM role, and it's sometimes a natural transition to go from that into product management. And of course, entrepreneurs, right? We've seen how the life of a product manager is like that of a small, scrappy startup CEO. The next skill is engineering. And this is a little controversial. It is a fact that engineering is not a requirement to be a great product manager. But in my experience, every great PM I've seen has had some understanding of engineering. That's because without knowing how software works, you will not be able to firstly vibe with your engineering team and gain their trust. And the second is you won't be able to understand how technology can drive a solution for your customers. So I think table stakes is basic software architecture, right? You need to understand how a system works end to end, the back end versus the front end, the way APIs work, what's the database. You need to know these things. But increasingly, and especially in digital companies and tech companies, if you're a little bit more hands-on, that really helps. So if you know how to program or what the basic algorithms and data structures are that your product is using, big O notation, right? When you come to companies like Google or Facebook that are massively scaled, you need to understand efficiencies of what you're doing. And finally, the world is moving towards artificial intelligence and machine learning. And understanding how those technologies work give you an edge in the market today. Again, software engineers are ideal candidates for possessing these kinds of skills, and so are other engineering disciplines. The next key skill is user interface design and user experience design. So, as a product manager, especially one that's working on customer facing products, you need to be able to build a delightful experience. You need to understand aesthetics, you need to understand usability, you need to understand how to create rough wireframes and take them to your users. But it doesn't end there. You also need to be able to understand how to get feedback from your users. So, how to run interviews, what kind of questions to ask, how to not bias a focus group towards an outcome, and how to take mock ups and put them in front of customers and get the kind of input you're trying to get. Again, UI designers and UX researchers, as well as graphic artists, are great candidates. In fact, some of the best PMs I've known actually came from a graphic design background. And finally, data analysis. So everything the PM does has to be grounded in data. All your decisions are data driven, or at least should be data driven. And so you need to understand the statistical properties of data. You need to understand things like confidence, significance. You need to understand how to run an A/B test so you can test your new features. Excuse me, or look at a funnel and understand how the user flows through that funnel and where the drop-offs are. It's also extremely useful to be able to do some of these analysis yourself. So a working knowledge of SQL or the ability to run a Python script in a Jupyter notebook is very powerful. I've had to do it a lot of times, and it's really gotten me out of some tough situations. And there are a lot of analytics tools out there, like Google Analytics, and knowledge of that is very useful to a PM. Again, data analysts and business analysts make great candidates for these kinds of roles. Now, onto the softer skills, right? Product management is fundamentally about people, and so people management is, I think, one of the key skills that a PM needs to have. Oftentimes, leadership is quoted as a skill, but I think it's more about soft influence. You need to convince people to be able to come with you and on the journey that you want to take your product towards. You need to build consensus. You don't have authority, so you need to make sure everyone's in sync. You need to negotiate a lot of times, right, to make your position clear and to do what you want to do. And you need to be adept at running meetings. I mean, a PM is going to spend a significant portion of her time in meetings, getting people together. And the other thing that not a lot of folk talk about is likability. It's a surprise how much better you be if people just like you as a product manager. They need to see you as trustworthy. They need to respect you in some sense. Also, it's important to be humble. I mean, you're in a place where you'll always have to learn and you'll always have to take information from outside. And it's sometimes very surprising, the number of PMs who, have a chip on their shoulder. It doesn't work well in the long run. And finally, a sense of humor goes a long way. If you want to spot a great product team, look at a team that when they sit together with the PMs, engineers, designers, they're cracking jokes, right? They're exchanging jibes. That's a healthy dynamic, and you want that in your team, and you want to create that in your team. The second soft skill is empathy. And this literally means being able to be in the shoes of somebody else. This is not limited to the customer, by the way. So customer obsession is critical. You need to feel the pain of the customer for whom you are building the product. But at the same time, when you're in a room full of business people, you need to be aligned with the strategic direction of the company, the financial direction of the company. When you're with engineering, for example, you need to understand the problems they're facing. You need to feel their pain when infrastructure goes down. When you're with sales and marketing, you need to have a sense of what's selling in the market. You need to understand what are those features that really pop out, right? When your teams are going out and selling your product. And again, in operational organization, you need to understand how the nuts and bolts of everything works. What I'm trying to say is you need to be one of the gang when you're in a room with a group of people, and there will be a lot of gangs you need to be a part of as a successful product manager. The third soft skill that's key is communication, right? To bring people together, to talk about your ideas, you need to have communication down perfectly. You will be looking at written communication, whether it's emails, chats, or creating documents, as well as verbal modes of communication, whether that's meetings or presentations like this one. But oftentimes, you also need to pay attention to non-verbal communication, right? Body language, facial expressions do change the reception of a message that you're trying to give. And your tone is critical too. You need to often weave stories when you're trying to convince people. You need to be engaging. You need to be interesting. Without that, you're not going to get your point across. And finally, I think intelligence is the fourth big pillar in product management. Oftentimes, you will be faced with highly ambiguous situations. And without the ability to think through it in a structured manner and use logic and inference to get conclusions, you will not be able to cut through the mess, and you will not be able to convince other people that you have done so. You have to be very methodical in the way you approach ambiguous problems, and communicate that to other people. You also need to have a fantastic ability to learn. It is true that most product managers are in multiple projects at the same time and jump from one project to another rather quickly. In this case, you need to be able to absorb enough information quickly enough to be able to talk intelligently about it with the team. And finally, without the healthy dose of curiosity, you aren't going to go anywhere. You need to be curious about the problems your customers are facing, curious about what kind of new things you can do to drive value, curious about how technology can power what you're trying to do. Without that basic bent of mind, it's very difficult to make a massive impact in this field. So those are the skills that are, I think essential for being a good PM. But how do you use all of this and break into the field? Well, in the vein of being a structured thinker, let me lay out the step-by-step process that has worked well for me. The first thing you need to do is learn. Now, as much as I would love to think that attending this webinar is all you need to do, it's not. Product management is a wide field and there's a lot to learn. So the best thing that worked for me is just pick up a bunch of books. Of course, pick up books on products like the ones I've highlighted here, but look at other fields as well, right? Learn about business in general, especially ones focused on startup companies or innovative companies. Learn about people, what makes people tick, what makes a good leader, what do people latch on to, in different contexts. And finally, read about startups in general or read startup founding stories. Often these are great ways to vicariously learn about challenges that other people have faced, and they usually come in sort of a narrative structure. So it's usually an easy read. Like it's a lot of fun to go through these books. In addition to this, reach out to other PMs, use LinkedIn, send out cold emails. Like I said, empathy is a key skill of a product manager. So you'll be surprised at how many of them will actually get back to you. And of course, attend seminars and webinars like this one and the other ones that Product School puts up. Once you're starting to get the hang of it, it's time to target opportunities. Now, these are in two main buckets. You might have internal opportunities. So the companies you're working for might have a product management position in-house. This is a great option to take because you already know the company, you know the people, and you know the problems. And you can position yourself to start filling in the role of a product manager. For others, this might not be possible or not even desirable, in which case you need to start looking externally. And you will find yourself looking at large companies versus small companies, right? And there's a whole range. Both kinds of companies give you something very different. So if you were to start a product career with a larger company, like let's say a Google or a Facebook, you will start to understand how to do world-class process and how to deal with things at scale. On the other hand, smaller companies are more geared towards speed and growth, right? But this comes at a cost of just massive chaos, right? And that can be unsettling to some. I have seen, people go across the spectrum. I've known PMs who've started with bigger companies and have gone on to fantastic positions in smaller ones. And what worked for me was the opposite. I was able to get into a smaller company, learn very quickly. Like Careem was a much smaller company back then, and eventually was able to make the move to a bigger company. So it's down to personal preference, but be cognizant about what you're going for. After you've targeted your opportunities, it's time to prepare that resume. And I'll use an example to go through these points, but what you should focus on is using your resume to highlight the kind of skills we talked about, right? You will not have direct product experience, but you should or would likely have experience that contributes or demonstrates those skills. Also, it's important to be outcome driven. Product managers are always their success is hitting goals and hitting metrics. So you need to be able to show that you can think in that way and talk about what you achieve. And finally, write a customized cover letter. I can't attest to how many people actually read a customized cover letter, but for the ones that do, it's a great way to show that you care. So let's take my own example, right? This is my resume, and everything below the product manager line was from my pre-product career. So let's look at this. By mentioning that I was a co-founder and that I have a degree in engineering management, I'm communicating that I have some business acumen. The fact that I was responsible for meeting clients and managing relationships shows that I had some people skills that I was exercising. I was a software engineer, so I clearly had that part nailed down. And I also mentioned the kind of outcomes I was able to achieve, whether it was, breaking even in my business in a competitive field, or being able to get the aerospace startup in the top 3 in the world. Right? Finally, I would like to think that, the mention of a high GPA or the membership with Mensa means that I still have a few functioning gray cells between my ears, but that's questionable, I guess. But the point is, right, you're trying to communicate the skills that you would need to be a good PM. Once this is done, it's time to start applying. And keep in mind, at this point, it's a purely numbers game. So don't hold back. Just find as many positions that are interesting to you and apply. Use, obviously, the official company channels, but get onto other job portals. Use LinkedIn, right? It's absolutely fine to apply to the same company through various channels, and I've done that before. But more than that, it's important to reach out after you make these applications. Reach out to recruiters on LinkedIn. If it's a small company, find the founders and email them. Talk to other employees. Now, you might think this is overkill, but here's an example of an email that I wrote to Careem after I had applied and hadn't heard back for about 2 weeks. It's precisely this email that got me through the door. Like, I was not hearing back. And so I searched the internet for some at Careem.com email, and I found a fun at Careem.com. And I shot out this email, and that got forwarded to HR, and what got me my interview, right? So these things actually work. If you've done enough applications, you should have a couple of interview calls, right? Does this mean you can just show up for the interview? Well, of course not, right? Not if you want to make a good impression. You need to study. Um, and there are a typical set of interview questions for product management that you need to be aware of. The two best books that I have found in this regard has been Cracking the PM Interview and Decode and Conquer. I highly recommend getting your hands on a copy and going through those examples. In addition to this, there are a lot of blogs on the internet that discuss these types of questions. And these days on sites like Udacity or Udemy, I think, it's possible to find courses that help you practice interview questions. But learning is not enough. You need to actually go out and practice, right? In an actual product management interview, you will be expected to stand up and write out your thoughts on a whiteboard. And if you can't do that, it doesn't matter how much you know. So replicate that in your own room and practice, like get a whiteboard, open up these questions and just imagine yourself in the interview and practice it. It is even better if you can get a fellow PM to sit in on these lessons, because that will give you the full experience of what an interview would feel like. And finally, research the company that you're interviewing for. Keep in mind, you're coming in without any product clout, and so you need to score extra points. The easiest way to do this is just being passionate about the company and knowing your stuff. So find out what the products of the company are. What's the mission of the company? What's their vision? Where are they struggling, right? Who are they competing with? And what's the culture and the leadership like? If you get these things right, it's a very easy way to just score brownie points straight off the bat. Finally, it's going to be interview day. At this point, basically, you've done everything that you could. So take it easy, relax. You need to be calm in order to let your mind function and lean into the interview. Be dynamic. Like in interviews, I've personally gotten up off a chair and just started pacing the room, right? And it's changed the dynamic of the room. People want PMs who are energetic and who are passionate. Work with the interviewer. Keep in mind, right? And I didn't know this earlier. This isn't an exam. It's not like you're being asked a question and have to give an answer. It's more of a discussion. What the interviewer is looking for is somebody that they can have an intelligent conversation with about the product. And a lot of times the questions are going to be ambiguous. So don't let it be one-sided. Talk to the interviewer, work with them. And keep in mind, interviews are designed to be difficult, right? The interviewer is going to push you to your limits. That's what they're there for. Keep your cool. And if you've practiced enough problems, that natural training is going to kick in. Finally, and I can't stress this enough, be nice. It's a common fact that people don't really think about, but nobody wants to hire pardon my French, nobody wants to hire an a-hole, right? You want to be the kind of person that people want to work with. And that's key for a product management position. Now you've done the interview. Unfortunately, at least in the initial stages, you might not get the offer, right? And it'll happen more often as you're starting out. That's okay. Don't be sad about it. Learn from it. Each interview is a learning experience, right? You get better and better the more interviews you do. Seek feedback. A lot of people are quite friendly in talking to you about what they think you could improve and where you could do better. And stay in touch. Just because you didn't get the job this time doesn't mean that you wouldn't be a good fit sometime down the line. In fact, that's how Google happened with me. I didn't make it through my first contact with the recruiter, but I reached out to him years later, and that opened up a path to where I am right now. So it does happen, right? And finally, keep trying. I first thought of being a product manager in Cornell, and that was over a decade ago, right? So it literally took me 10 years and hundreds of applications to finally crack it. So just keep at it. eventually you will get the job, right? Is that the end of the story? Well, it shouldn't be. Your first job is likely your most critical in your product career, and you need to optimize it for learning and for growth. So here are a few tips that I've gathered through my experience. The first thing you do when you get that job is start networking internally. Again, product management is a people profession, and you will need all the people in your company to make things happen. So, in addition to talking to your own team, the PMs and engineers and designers there, start talking to other PMs and other verticals. Oftentimes, products are interlinked, and you will need to work with them to accomplish anything. Speak to domain leads. They generally have a good 360 view of the business, or at least parts of the business that could be very valuable. And sit in with customer service. This is a trick I learned that is invaluable. You're trying to solve customer problems, and the place that customer comes to with their problems is customer service. So sitting there gives you a very quick idea of what's wrong with your product and where the headroom is. And this doesn't need to be very formal. In fact, one of the PMs I knew when he first joined the company basically set up coffee with people every few days. And it was a very informal kind of introduction. And that really, really helped him. The second thing is find a mentor. Now, I highly recommend Master Yoda, but in case you can't find him, find a product manager in your organization who is both experienced and wields some kind of influence. And there are great benefits to this. First of all, it gives you a very different perspective, right? You will be talking to a PM working in a different part of the business than your own chain of command. The other thing is, gives you the opportunity to discuss more sensitive topics. There are some things that might be difficult to talk to with your manager, even sometimes how to deal with your manager, right? This external mentor can help you resolve those issues in a safe space. It creates obviously an informal connection and exposes you to newer ideas and thoughts. And this has been so pivotal in my life because the mentor that I had in Careem was the one who was able to work with me to help me get this position at Google. So these things really pay off. The third thing is do the dirty work, seek the dirty work. So when you join a company, there will always be a set of projects that nobody wants to touch. They will either be deemed too difficult, too risky, too ambiguous, just boring, or somehow unimportant. Keep an eye out for these. These are the places where you, as a young PM, can drive immediate impact. Go ahead and fill that vacuum because when you're early in your career, you're at your lowest risk. What I mean by that is, let's say you picked a project that is extremely difficult or risky. If you make something happen, you'll get points straight off the bat. And if you don't, well, you're the new kid, right? You have nothing to lose. Nobody's really going to hold that against you. So this is a very quick sort of catalyst to kickstart your growth within a company. And finally, just work hard. Product management is an intense profession. You will be dealing with multiple stresses and points of view and lack of resources, and it's a mess a lot of times, right? And it's very, very taxing, and you'll often need to put in long hours. I have done so many times, sitting with my engineering team at like 3 in the morning trying to solve a critical issue. Like this is part and parcel of the job. Um, and like Elon Musk said, nobody ever really changed the world on 40 hours a week. Well, nobody I know became a great product manager on 40 hours a week when they started out. So, work hard. There's no substitute to that. I guess that's about all I have for you today. But here is my LinkedIn and my email address. Honestly, I would love to hear from you guys. If there's anything I can help with, it's always a pleasure to reach out to new aspiring PMs as well as existing ones, and that's what all the fun of this is. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to Product School for hosting this webinar. And good luck.